not to get too philosophical, but even from a product standpoint, we know that the most successful products aren't about giving people what they want. It's about giving people what they didn't know they want. And similarly, when you think about inclusive marketing, it's like, don't reflect the world in its sort of most, let's call it segregated form, the way that some people experience it today, but reflect a world in its most unified form and sort of bring that into existence by showing people the possibilities of what that world could look like. Because nobody has more power to change the way people see the world than marketers.
Three, two, one. Welcome to the Campfire Circle. I'm your host, Tanya Bhattacharya, and I empower purpose-driven women in building influential personal brands that drive change and raise revenue. We all talk about getting a seat at the table, but why though? Who wants to sit in a stuffy boardroom anyway? Let's reimagine the ultimate space of leadership as a campfire circle, where we share stories that inspire movements, build brave communities to huddle together with for warmth, and where there is always room. Come sit with us. I'm here with my friend Lola Bakare, who's an advisor to CMOs and an inclusive marketing strategist. She is all about unleashing marketing magic, helping leaders maximize their impact and unlock their excellence. And after over a decade of success in the corporate world, working with top global brands, Lola started PWoC, a consultancy that focuses on helping marketing leaders reach the highest levels of success through training, workshops, and client engagements. And I just have to say that Lola came into my life at the right time. You know, they say when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And I say that because Lola co-founded the Professional Women of Color group on Clubhouse about this time last year. And that Tuesday night, one scary thing I did last week was a staple in my entrepreneur diet last year. I don't know that I'd be here where I am without that meeting. And I know we'll talk more about that. But first things first, Lola, thank you so much for being on the Campfire Circle podcast.
Thank you so much, Tanya. I'm so glad to be here. And I was so excited when I saw that you launched this podcast. It's such a representation of everything I loved about your contributions in One Scary Thing on Clubhouse. And it's just an honor to be on the show with you. So thank you for having me. And thank you for that beautiful introduction. I'm like, wow, I need to kind of steal some of that for my own stuff.
Take it.
So generous. Thank you.
Take it. Take all of it. Well, you know, I mean, you and I have been in many rooms where we've learned how to give each other flowers, learned how to amplify each other. Not that we didn't know how to do that before, but I feel like we really got to hone our craft together. And I just appreciate you so much and everything that you are and everything that you do. And, you know, as a marketer yourself, I love talking to marketers because we are kind of cut from the same cloth. We're storytellers. And I know that you are used to sharing stories on behalf of your clients all day. But today, I'd love for you to tell me your story. Like, what did you grow through to become the guide that you are today?
You know, it's funny. It's always the hardest thing for people who spend all day giving others advice to sort of like turn the camera inward and talk about oneself. So I'm excited to have the opportunity to do so. But it's funny. It always makes me a little bit nervous. And I think people are always surprised when I say that because it's like, Lola, you're never nervous. You always just jump right in and say what you're going to say. But yeah, it's always a special moment to kind of like do that. Let's turn the camera around and make it about yourself. So, you know, the way that you introduced me kind of tees up the answer to your question. How did I become the guide? I would say two things. I've always kind of been this way. So during the pandemic, I had the pleasure of spending, it was like, I think a little over 18 months back at home with my parents. And, you know, someone in their mid to late 30s to sort of have that time, it was really special. And I got to ask them a lot of questions about like what I was like growing up, especially as I was sort of building some new elements into my business that had a lot to do with just, you know, sort of net new ways of self-expression. So just constantly this like inventory of things that, you know, I was thinking about. And it was great to kind of have them to bounce ideas off of. And I remember at one point I asked my mom, like, have I always been the sort of person who like gives people advice, maybe even unsolicited advice? She was like, yes. She's like, literally since you were in kindergarten, you have been this way. Like you've always been the leader, the person who comes in a group of people and kind of decides what happens next. So I think in a strange way, just following the intuitive and just sort of like, I think almost destined line of my career from job to job, there was always this part of me that did that in organizations. And it just became a natural progression into what it would look like to create a business of my own. So, I think there's a lot of, I would say like wins and, accomplishments, but also challenges and hard times that led to the particular way that I use that gift today. But long story short, it's always been part of my essence to be an advisor.
I just want to name really quick how incredible of an opportunity is to sit, I'm imagining you sitting at the feet of your parents and just asking what your childhood was like. And I think that's such a gift because it reflects back that what we are doing now, like, is kind of a birthright in a way. It's innate. It's like what we've been meant to do. And we have that freedom and that license to do that now as entrepreneurs. We get to do what we were always meant to do. I just had to name that. I think that's so beautiful.
No, I think it's such an interesting point, and it's probably a good one for people who are maybe on the earlier stages of an entrepreneurial journey or even an entrepreneurial journey. Like, I mean, this is something I talk with clients about all the time, but any job, whether it's one that you created for yourself or one that you got hired to do, involves some level of role creation. How are you going to show up? What are you going to be known for? What's your true value proposition? This is one of the workshops that we do, PWoC, and that I've talked about in the professional women of color rooms. But like, that's a question we all have to explore. And I think we don't use the term imposter syndrome. You and I did an event where, we talked about the danger of that term, but I'll name it what it is, the self-doubt that sometimes comes with that intrapreneurial or entrepreneurial journey. One of the best ways that I found to combat that is to have those conversations with people who knew you before. And then to your point, you start to see that like, wait, like I'm not actually doing anything different than I am. I'm just turning that into something that I get to do all day. So this shouldn't be that scary.
That's exactly it. I was talking to my parents the other day and like a core memory got unlocked of a time that I had our family come together. I held a family meeting so that we could pick our family color, our family like slogan. Like it was so
that's amazing.
I'm not
How
even
old were
kidding.
you?
I was still living in Pennsylvania at the time. So before we moved to California, so this was before I was 8 years old.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you did like a branding exercise. You did a VIP day for your family. That's amazing.
I did. I remember my little brother being very sweet and attentive. It was just a core memory. So you're right. It's like, this is not new. We have been doing this all along. We just get to package it up a little bit differently and get paid for our expertise that we've honed for 3 decades, right? So
exactly.
That's it. So you are an expert on inclusive marketing, and I love the way that sounds. But can you define that for us? Like, what is inclusive marketing?
So inclusive marketing, it's such an evolving space, but it's funny. A LinkedIn post I saw this weekend on what I think it's evolved from, which is multicultural marketing, really reminded me why I'm so passionate about championing inclusive marketing the way that I see it. And the way that I see it, it's about a marketer really not just focusing on equitable representation, but fully disrupting the idea that we need to segment people demographically in order to engage with them. So this is the sort of dichotomy between general market and multicultural, in my mind, is extremely outdated. And there are a number of different case studies and examples of where that line is something that our systems and the way that we buy media and the way that we organize teams they're organized around that dichotomy. But if you really think about how people make decisions and see the world, the stratifications are so much more nuanced than that. So inclusive marketing is the idea that a brand should be going to market with a purpose and a mission based on the world that it wants to create, not the typical lines that, sort of create separation between demographic groups in the world as it is today. There's another segment of that. There's another sort of cut of inclusive marketing that I call social impact marketing. And that is even more clearly defined as marketing that makes a social impact that also drives the bottom line more effectively than anything else. So there's these sort of two concepts that I talk about a lot with my program and workshop, Maximize the Movement, which, as you can imagine, is named because the idea is that as a marketer, you can get business value out of really authentically embracing these cultural and social movements that the world is really focused on today and will be for the foreseeable future, is my belief. So that's kind of a clunky definition, but look at it as really the opposite of multicultural and mainstream general market marketing, the way that we see that those two sort of binaries today. It's really thinking about how do I speak to my audience holistically? And in doing so, how do I create a more holistic world?
So good.
Think about, there's that word include, right? I don't think wokeness is a dirty word. That's like a Fox News fable. But I also want people to not necessarily think about inclusive marketing through that lens only. It really is the idea of including all of the relevant context in how you take a product or brand to market and engage with the people that you want to be in love with it, and not just thinking about it in one way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I see that. So I just interviewed my friend Shay for this podcast. That'll be live right before yours. And she talks a little bit about how she was the one woman of color working in these large advertising firms. And she initially felt like she didn't have a say, she didn't have a voice. But then at some point, it became clear to her the huge buying power and influence that all people have, that people of color have. And she used that relatability and understanding, at least of that culture, to really catapult her career. So it's just another testament to why inclusion is not just the right thing, it's the good thing. It makes good business sense too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I watched the Abercrombie documentary this weekend, and it was so interesting because it wasn't until towards the end when that point came up that this idea of only representing upper crust waspy, traditionally quote unquote good looking America, white America, as the norm that, all teenage, preteen, whatever that demographic people should aspire to. Not only was it wrong in that it made so many, i.e. most people, feel excluded, but it was also pretty dumb because they could have made a lot more money if they had thought about a broader, spectrum of people as relevant to that product. So I think more brands are really maturing and thinking about things this way now. But I think the next sort of frontier of both social impact and inclusive marketing is going to be about really disrupting the idea that there's even a right way to talk to, a Latina audience or a Black audience or a white audience that's different. It's more about what are the mindset segments that you want to appeal to and what stories are you telling to make an impact, not necessarily based on what they believe today.
Right.
Not to get too philosophical, but even from a product standpoint, we know that the most successful products aren't about giving people what they want. It's about giving people what they didn't know they want. And similarly, when you think about inclusive marketing, it's don't reflect the world in its sort of most, let's call it segregated form, the way that some people experience it today, but reflect a world in its most unified form and sort of bring that into existence by showing people the possibilities of what that world could look like. Because nobody has more power to change the way people see the world than marketers. I mean, that might be a thing that we don't feel great about. And there might be like a Black Mirror moment that we think is kind of icky. But at the end of the day, it's the truth as it stands in the world as we know it today.
That's it, because we have the responsibility to imagine something new that maybe does not exist yet fully, but we can birth that through telling these stories that we do. So,
exactly.
This might be a stupid question, but when you were telling me about inclusive marketing, the example of Nike and Colin Kaepernick came up with that ad where they said, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. Is that inclusive marketing, or is that social impact marketing, or is that something else?
I think that is both. And I would call it more social impact, because the point of that campaign was to align Nike with the, cultural cause of Black Lives Matter, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like sort of giving Nike consumers not only a permission, but they sort of drew a line in the sand and said, this is the side that we're on, like it or not. I mean, think about the messaging. And this is one that I've thought about and talked about a lot with different people, but think about the representation, even of what they were doing as far as saying sacrificing everything. There were a lot of people who wear Nikes and who support that brand who did not believe in what Colin Kaepernick was doing. And putting out that message, they showed support for him in a way that some might argue could have shouldered some risk. But in doing that, you really strengthen your brand's equity by taking that stand. And, it was only good for business for Nike. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Because they showed up in a way that, had some inherent risk. And as they say, as corny as it is, no risk, no reward.
That's right. And we can see that was a good move in the numbers. But in the moment when it was going down, a lot of people expressed positive things, like including myself. And there were other people who took to Twitter to burn their Nike shoes in protest, which was, anyway, won't go too deep into that. But we can see how these examples of inclusive marketing, social impact marketing can actually shine a light on the fracturing or the division that's just like present in our society right now, in our world. So my question becomes like, how do you counsel your clients? How do you advise your clients to approach the haters and the trolls and all of the stuff that can come along with imagining a new future?
That's a great question. And the way that I message it is embrace them and thank them, right, for giving you insight into the part of their customer base that really is not their ideal target. Like at some level, it's okay to not be speaking to everyone. And when people have visceral negative reactions to messages around human rights and inclusivity and, honestly championing the lives of a particular ethnicity of people, which is what Nike did in that case, if you're against that, then I'm not sure I'm really wanting to speak to you. Mm-hmm. So the idea is not to try to talk to everyone as a brand. Like Seth Godin famously said, and this is marketing, when you go to think about your brand strategy, the key question to ask is who is it for and what's it for? So in those moments, I encourage people to think about the blowback as clarity. You have a better understanding of who you are for and who you are not. And, on the other side of that coin, chances are a lot of the people who in the moment express that kind of like visceral hate for what you're doing, they might be closer to coming along to a better way of looking at the world than we think. But we can't get them there if we almost enable and sort of pander to their limiting beliefs. Mm-hmm. So those moments of negative reaction aren't always actually things that brands should look to avoid, in my opinion.
Yeah, 100%. I remember going through this program called the Op-Ed Project, where we learned as individuals, as thought leaders, how to create an op-ed that would stand out. And part of the framework we learned was actually like address the opposition. And if there isn't going to be any opposition to what you're laying down, like pick a new topic, because it's not an opinion. It's not an op-ed. It's just, it's fluff at that point. So you're absolutely right. But, on the theme of let's say on the theme of doing scary things, like, is there a framework or certain steps that you take CMOs or brands or entrepreneurs through to take on these inclusive marketing campaigns?
Yeah, I mean, you tee it up so elegantly, but the framework for what I call is moving past the performative with your inclusive or social impact marketing. I create it's very easy. It's 3 steps. It's almost kind of like a checklist of what it looks like to get it right. And in Maximize the Movement, this is called the RSR framework. That stands for revenue impact, social impact, and reputation impact. And the idea is that if your strategy, your campaign, your initiative, whatever it is that you're planning to do as a marketer, if it checks all 3 of those boxes, then you're on your way to doing something that isn't going to be dinged as performative in the long term. And that really has the opportunity to change the way people see and experience the world. So from a revenue standpoint, this is the one that's probably the most controversial. But at the end of the day, marketers are employed to elevate the business impact of their brands. And that involves making more money, right? So whether it's sales or customer acquisition, however you sort of look at that bottom line impact, the first part of the framework is make sure that your initiative is going to achieve that. And so if you think about what this protects brands from doing, look at the black square, I call it Black Square Mageddon that happened right after the murder of George Floyd. If people were thinking about activities that actually move their business forward, we wouldn't have seen any of those black squares. There's no business impact. There's no revenue impact. And the thing that not having that really leads to is there's no investment. So that's the reason not to I know some people have this sort of icky reaction. Well, if you're doing social impact, anything, it shouldn't be about making money. It's like, no, sometimes it has to be about driving the business in order for it to actually be real. So if you think about that as the first check, it's like, okay, then really important to assess is the social impact you're looking to make meaningful and measurable? Are you meaningfully and measurably creating long-term impact towards furthering equity, supporting diversity, and fostering inclusion? So I'll say that again. Furthering equity, supporting diversity, or fostering inclusion. Are you actually doing something that is meaningfully and measurably addressing that goal for your cultural cause or your marginalized group? And if the answer is, we're not really sure, then it's not really dialed in enough. And an example of something that didn't check this box that came out that same summer of 2020 was Uber's campaign. So I'm forgetting the exact line, but it was something like, they didn't use the word believe in, but it was a billboard and, a full splashy campaign. It was something like, if you believe in racism, delete your account, or something like that. I forget what the exact language was. But the problem with that is it was really just to glorify a black square because, okay, great, you've said this nice thing, but how is this actually changing the way Black people exist in the world? How is this actually changing the instances of racism that we know have happened even in your own company? How is this actually doing anything that you can be held accountable to? It wasn't.
Right.
An example that I like to counter that one with is what Airbnb has done to sort of counter the way that certain hosts screen their guests, who they're going to take as a guest, in ways that aren't inclusive, right? This has happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to you. You feel like you're going to get the house, and then all of a sudden they see your name, and it's like all of a sudden they ghost, right? Airbnb created a mechanism where now as a host, you have to actually physically check a box and say that you're not going to do that, right? So it's a small thing, but they productize the impact in a way that it can be measured and quantified. And Uber's campaign didn't really do that. It was just a platitude.
Right.
So being able as a marketer to measure the success or lack thereof of your social impact or inclusive marketing initiative is really key. And then the third one is your reputation. So is this something that you will, again, be able to measure the way that it increased your brand sentiment, that it led to earned media impressions? Is there an upside for you that is about, your brand being known for something better? And if there's not, again, we think about the black squares, if we think about the billboards with the platitudes, all those sorts of things, if you really think about them, they're probably going to actually lead to losing sentiment points, losing reputation points. And so that's where you stay away. So if you think through those three lenses, revenue, impact, social impact, and reputation impact, and in all of those lenses, making sure you're constantly assessing the level of measurability of, the impact of, each part of your campaign or strategy or whatever it is, then you're going to be, set up for success.
I love that so much. And it's so thought out. It's so well thought out. And it answers one of the questions I was thinking about asking you, which is that, I think that some companies experience fear around going in this direction because they're afraid of looking performative. But if they do these things and invest the time, the energy, the resources, the money into really doing it right, they can't look performative because it's not performative. Does that make sense?
Right. And it's like, let's disrupt that languaging of the fear, because it maintains the sort of, I think political correctness is the right word, but it almost protects brands using that excuse, because I'm going to call it what it is, to not enter this space from the critique that we really should have for them. The reality is they're afraid of being held accountable to not being performative. That's the fear. It's not a fear that what we might do might be performative. It's the fear that if we do this, we're going to have to do it in a way that's real. Right. And that can be harder. It can require more investment. It can require more discomfort. It can and will, if you do it right, have outsized impact on the business. But it involves working through all of the things that exist in our society that got us here and keep us where we are with a lot of these things, like the unconscious biases, like the microaggressive mindsets that really don't actually put the importance of inclusivity as high on the list as we know it should be. So that's the first thing I say in any conversation where that comes up. It's like, let's be honest with ourselves about what our fear is. And 9 times out of 10 at that moment, people kind of sit back and are like, oh, you're right. Because it's not rocket science to know what it looks like to do something that's not a platitude, that's not performative. But it does take a little bit of comfort with discomfort, or, it takes sitting in a place of less status quo than is usual to actually move past that. And that's really what the fear is of.
Right. But we've got to get used to it, I think, because this is the way that the world is moving. Thank God, finally. But we're not going backwards. So
right. And when you remind people of the insane levels of success that everybody who's gotten comfortable is having, we talk about Fenty Beauty all the time. Think about a world 15 years ago, Tanya. And I know you and I have experienced this. I remember growing up, you couldn't find makeup shades in your color. And if you found one, it was the one. Right. And the one brand. And if the undertone or whatever was off, you're just going to look weird.
Right.
That's all. Those are the choices we had. And at that time, it was ingrained in people that, it would be impossible to stock more shades than this in the average store. There's nothing we can do about this. In comes Fenty, and it's actually, we're going to have 70 SKUs.
That's right.
We're going to make $1 billion.
100%. 100%. And she earned, yes, 100%. That's a perfect example. Okay. That's a perfect example. And Rihanna is such a fabulous. So this is a good segue, because I know you've worked with companies like PepsiCo and these huge global corporations. And, I think that as aspiring thought leaders, as independent consultants, as advisors, as these one-woman shows in a way, we also can partake in inclusive marketing, right? And I want to know. Absolutely. So you're a 2022 LinkedIn top voice, which is amazing. I'm so proud of you. I love you. I think it's
Thank you.
So good. So good. And I want to know how you use LinkedIn to spread your vision of inclusion as an individual.
Ooh, I love that question, because, I've actually been thinking about how to get way more systematized with it. So I'm part of the Black Marketers Association of America. And one of the things I did this year was, instead of just buying my membership, I bought 5 additional memberships that I'm going to be giving out to people throughout the year, so that more people can be a part of the organization who may not, have been able to afford it. And the upside there is, in the post where I'm giving out those memberships, what do I get? I get exposure. I get new followers. Like it might sound icky to some people to be thinking about this business upside of that sort of activity. But at the end of the day, what's wrong with a win-win? As long as the win to the person who's meant to be the recipient of the impact is real, like, we're actually going to be giving out that membership.
Right.
It actually supports the Black Marketers Association of America, which is a nonprofit I really care about. It actually supports that individual is going to be getting the membership, and it actually has an exposure upside for me. Like, there's nothing bad about that. And it would be weird if I gave out those memberships without talking about it. Mm-hmm. So that's like the perfect example of, like, non-Pepsi level, but like really brass tacks, small business level, social impact and inclusive marketing. Like, it's just doing something for good on both sides. It really is that simple. And when you start to think about it this way, there's so many examples of times when we could do it that way, but we miss one of the links. Like, we do something that's, philanthropic, but then we never talk about it.
Right.
Or we have the opportunity to do something in a way that moves the needle, but we just kind of don't, because we weren't really thinking about it. So it's really just putting these opportunities top of mind for everyone. And as far as like my everyday on LinkedIn, this is something I see you doing a ton too, Tanya, but just that action of when you see somebody who is a person of color, and specifically, my lens for doing this is women of color, all women of color. Like, if I scroll past something that you did that I know was scary, I'm going to stop and celebrate you. I'm going to stop and be that first person to comment. I'm going to stop and like make you feel seen in a way that I could easily just not.
Right.
But like, also I easily can. So that's the thing that's probably the most consistent daily practice on LinkedIn that I hold myself accountable to. It's like, I'm never going to be in a place where I'm just going to be okay scrolling past, Tanya, your post about your podcast. Like, that is a place where I want to show up and celebrate you. Takes 10 seconds, Yeah.
And that's a practice, that's a practice. That's an ongoing, consistent practice. I think sometimes of thought leadership more as a practice than a marketing strategy. It's a practice of showing up as our best self. And
it's so true. And your most authentic self. So it depends for everybody. Some people would find that like an extreme weight on their day, the idea that they're going to be. But for me, spontaneity is part of what fuels my joy, right?
Right.
Now, the idea of, I'm going to do a very composed post on LinkedIn every single day, like, that makes me freak out. I'm never going to be that person.
Right.
And it's okay. Right. So it's just like, to your point, finding that authentic and natural way to express and like really leaning into it and getting the most out of it and patting yourself on the back for it, celebrating yourself for it. I think we talked about this all the time in professional women of color, but as women of color, I think a lot of the time we're conditioned to only think that the things that made us feel tired or like strained us are actual like output as far as work. We forget that the best way to design your life is to make sure the things you're doing every day don't feel like work, don't actually drain you. So I love the way that you set that up, because I think for a lot of people, if you just inventory those days where you're not overly trying to do things differently than you already do, you're going to find the keys to designing, again, entrepreneurially, whether it's at a company or entrepreneurially in your own business, the work life that makes sense for you and the work styles and work practices, to your point, that make the most sense for you, instead of trying to do the things that you think you should do, because those things just are impossible. They're never going to happen consistently. We all need to get over it.
That's right. That's right. And it becomes a chore. And it's like, if you are an incredible opera singer. I don't also need you to be a great financial analyst. Like, just do your thing. Do your thing that you just shine at, and then we can all just shine together. Hey, if anything you're hearing today inspires you to get more visible as a go-to trusted voice for your audience and drive change towards your deeper mission, I've got something for you. LinkedIn is my favorite place to share my stories and build relationships with my co-conspirators and brand new friends. So I put together a free resource with 14 prompts to create your next post on LinkedIn. Take all the guesswork out of what to say and just start building your impact and influence. Be sure to tag me in your post so I can come by, cheer you on, and amplify your message. You can find those free prompts in the show notes. Okay, back to the episode. I think that this is a great segue into the professional women of color community that you co-founded and built, especially the Tuesday night One Scary Thing, where we shared one scary thing and practiced. We actually, you know what we did? We talked a little bit earlier about imagination. I think that we developed and co-created a space. We imagined a space where nothing like that really existed yet for us, for any of us.
No. And it was what we needed at the time, you know?
And I had just started my business when I found it. So it was a huge part of me being able to keep it pushing during all of the scary things that would come up with starting a business in the midst of the pandemic. And it just gave us all an opportunity to name the scary thing, to sit with it, to hold it in a community of other supportive people, to push ourselves to seek scary opportunities sometimes, and to really feel it, you know? And I want to ask you, because I don't know if I ever did, like, how did this idea emerge for you to co-create this space?
Well, another thing that represents the essence of like all of my movements, and it was purely spontaneous. It was in a moment of inspiration. It was in a burst of creativity. And then we just made it something real. Yeah. So I was in a Slack group called Shatter, which is kind of like a off the books spinoff of Chief. I hope I'm allowed to say that out loud. But it's like, a free Slack group that you can get an invitation to, where a lot of the women who are in Chief are in that Slack group as well. And I was invited by my friend Asia May, who also is the person who invited me to Clubhouse. And she's one of those people who always shows up as like the person that puts me in a space that ends up being a thing that's like amazing for me. I have so many examples of that. And you know those people in your life who are like always that person. She's that person. So thanks, Age. But yeah, from in that space, I met Inari. Mm-hmm. And again, it's always about, well, what's the unmet need? And then what's the spark to address that? So we wanted a space where we could celebrate voices of color, because there are fewer than not in that group, for showing up and saying the thing that we thought might be a little uncomfortable to say. That was how it started. And then we heard about Clubhouse and we decided to put it on Clubhouse. And then, gosh, I'm forgetting exactly who it was, but one of the amazing women who just showed up in the room the first time we did it had the idea to turn this into a weekly One Scary Thing. So it started off, the first one was just voices of color. And then the One Scary Thing idea came from a voice in the room that time. And then we just did it every week that first year of the pandemic. I think it was starting in the winter of 2021 until this past winter. The consistency was amazing. Like, that project really taught me that you can be the spark person, the person that starts the project. That's always my superpower. But you can also structure it in a way that you have enough people surrounding the effort, and you've designed it in a way that's lightweight enough that like you can consistently show up for it. So that was a huge learning experience for me too. But it was amazing because like I needed that outlet. I was growing into some new areas of service in my business. Just like you said, you were at kind of at that starting point, and, applying to awards and, applying to be on stages that I never imagined I would be on without the platform of like a major Fortune 500 brand putting me up for it. And I needed that motivation to really just say yes to myself in those moments of pressing send. And so it was just so powerful, and met so many amazing people. But yeah, that was how it started. And it's funny, I was just messaging with Samantha, who co-leads it with me now, and we're trying to figure out what the next movement is going to be. So we haven't had rooms this year consistently yet, but just trying to kind of stay open to that natural next extension of what the group becomes without any pressure.
Right.
Because I know even if we are done with it as a project, the project was a success and the project served so many people in really impactful ways. So that's another piece of advice I would have for folks. Like, be okay with letting things evolve and the ways that they naturally are going to. And sometimes that involves a project having a beginning, a middle, and an end. And that's okay. And just being able to naturally flow with where things are taking you in your entrepreneurial journey is really important to staying open to the right opportunities, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's such a good point. I think sometimes we think that something failed because it ended, but no, it served its purpose. It had incredible impact. It brought people together in a really interesting, loose network that continues to bear fruit in all of these different kinds of ways. I mean, a bunch of people throughout that process who are part of the group have been moving to LA, like Amanda and people have just been like moving to where I am. And so
and like seeing each other when they go to different cities, and the Slack group is still active. So I don't think we're done with it. I think we're just trying to stay open to what it's going to become. One of the ideas I have is that we start doing a monthly room that, again, is just a lot more lightweight. And I'm always open to anybody listening who like really wants to run with that project. Like, come on in, do something with it. The space and the infrastructure is there. I know in my truth, I am generally like the spark. So what makes me good at the work I do as an advisor.
That's right.
I get to let my clients go actually do it.
That's right.
I'm the person that helps them figure out the how and the what and the sort of why and the sort of like, the vision, that moment of like, yes, I'm motivated. I get them there. And then it's on them to go do. And that space is exactly where I'm meant to sit.
You're living in your strength. You're living in your strength and your purpose. And that's the best place to be. So as we start to kind of wrap this up, there's this one question that I ask all my guests towards the end. And I'm so curious to hear your answer. My question is, what is your big, dreamy, imaginative future for our future world, right?
Ooh.
What are you imagining up? What's the legacy you're leaving?
At large?
Yeah, for the big world. Like as a direct impact of the work that you're doing now, how will the next generation live because of it?
Wow. I mean, that's huge. But, Tanya, that means so much to me. And it really, so I'm just going to speak this. This is the first time I'm talking about this.
Yeah.
I went on a business retreat. My friend Quanisha Green hosts these retreats called Black Women CEO in really cool locations and takes us through her curriculum of just like manifesting that next level in your business. And the retreat was in March and we were in Accra, Ghana. And it was like 7 of us in this beautiful house, like going through the curriculum and also seeing the sites and having these experiences. And one of the things I wrote down on my board of sort of, what my dreams were was to write the book for Maximize the Movement. And I kid you not, literally the next day, a publisher from a major publishing house and an acquisition editor reached out to me, literally, do you want to write the book on this for us? Like, let's work on a proposal together.
Wow.
And so that is something that I'm working on, but it is one of those things, and I'm going to say it out loud here, is because I want everyone to feel seen in these moments of like, I have pushed back the send date on my first input to him twice now. He's on vacation this week. So like my new deadline is Monday of next week. Get these initial concepts to him, like get the ball rolling. I could easily take myself out of that game. But one of the things that you just inspired me to remind myself of is that what is the potential future world impact of actually being the one that writes this book? It means a world where more marketers, more people who have control of how people see and experience the world than just the Fortune 500s, the Doves who get it, the Pelotons who get it, are creating worlds with their business that make everybody feel more seen and included, and using that to have business impact. So I want a world where I talked about the Abercrombie documentary, where no young girl has to feel like because she didn't fit into the tiny size large Abercrombie shirt in high school, like she wasn't good enough. Because she didn't look like all the other, long-limbed, tan, blonde people in their advertisements, she wasn't good enough. Like, I want a world where the people who create that cultural sort of, the zeitgeist, if you will, are held accountable to higher standards across the entire business landscape, from B2C to B2B to small business to local business. Like, this becomes something that we all have the potential and are motivated to do because we see the impact of it for our bottom line goals. And thus we embrace the possibility of us being the ones who make it better for everyone, and in turn make it better for ourselves. Like, that's the world I want to see. And there are so many other manifestations of that. Like, I also want to see a world where more women speak up in meetings. Like, we've talked about that. But in the now, in this moment of really focusing in on what Maximize the Movement is going to become, that's the vision. And it's one that has some fear associated with it for me. Certainly, I think to myself things like, well, what qualifies you to write the book on this? You're going to talk about a lot of case studies, but you didn't work on those campaigns yourself. Just because you interviewed someone doesn't mean you have credibility to be the one who teaches about it. Yes, I do. I have all these books back here that you can see of people who did that very same thing. Like, why not me? So, yeah.
Oh, damn. That was so
It's real. Like, we're in this moment. None of this is easy, everyone listening.
That's right. None of it is easy. None of it is easy, but it can be simple when we lean into our community and remember that we're interdependent, because even if you weren't the one working on that campaign, the fact that someone else worked on that campaign doesn't mean that you're not the right person to write this book, because you have the connection with that person. You're bringing them into your community, letting that story be heard, and together, you are making this vision happen. And that's another thing that's so powerful about vision. When you told me your vision, I just got so excited. Like, people listening can't see my face right now, but I'm so excited about your vision. And so when you share that with other people, people are going to continue leaning in, asking you how they can support you, how they can make this happen with you. And that's what it's about. Like, I'm so I love what you just said so much. I'm on board.
I mean, I've seen it happen. Like, yeah, Tanya, for anybody on the fence. So the name Maximize the Movement came about the summer of 2020. My coach, my first ever business coach, she's an abundance coach. She's amazing. Jocelyn Kelly Reed, check her out if you're looking to get into just some pushing yourself to next level stuff. It was a name she actually came up with in one of our sessions. Initially, I think I was calling it Elevate Your Impact. Like, boring. Thanks, Jocelyn. Maximize the Movement is so much better. And then worked with Allison Turner, who she is a contractor I work with. We haven't been doing as much work together anymore because she's off doing her own really cool stuff. But for about the first year and a half of PWoC, growing into workshops and all of this different stuff that was sort of new to me that I wanted to create, she was the person who was putting the structure together of all the decks and the frameworks. And I have ideas, she helps visualize them, right? So from the idea to working with my coach to working with Allison, Maximize the Movement manifested into a workshop then. And now, 2 years later, in the spring of 2022, we won a Gold Anthem Award for that work. I remember the day I submitted that work to the Anthem Awards, I was about to not, because I was no, I mean, come on. This is the Webby's Social Impact Award thing. It's the first year of it. There's got to be a bunch of other stuff more important that's going to win awards. Should I really do this? And I did. And we didn't just win silver. We didn't just win bronze. We won gold. And I'm saying all of that because I want everybody listening to know that whatever it is that you're called to do, like, it will work if you do it. You may not know how it's going to work yet,
That's
but
right.
it can become something that you will be very proud of. And the only way to stop that from happening is to not do it.
Right. That's right. That's right. You can't do this wrong. You can't do it wrong.
You can't do it wrong.
Yeah.
There is no wrong.
That's right. Oh,
you know?
So good. So how can people stay in touch with you? How can they find you? How can they work with you? Where do you live online?
So you can find me on my website, makeitbe.co, makeitbe.co. Or as we mentioned, LinkedIn. I'm always on LinkedIn. You can find me. Just search for Lola Bakare. I'm sure my spelling is somewhere on where this podcast will be living, or the spelling of my last name. And yeah, I pretty much say yes to all connections. But recently, Tanya, I've been writing this little automated when I think someone's about to try to sell me like lead gen. I'll say, like, would love to connect, but please no solicitations.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my little hack for that. Because yeah, that's a whole nother story we can talk about. But hey, everybody, I'm all for people shooting their shot. So I'm not going to not connect with someone who's doing the work they need to do to sell what they're selling. But yeah, LinkedIn is probably where I spend the most time online. And as far as working together, I'm really looking to bring in more marketing teams that would like to engage in any of my workshops. So that's something you can find out more about on the website, and particularly Maximize the Movement. It's something that I want to bring in to more and more marketing teams. So, whether it's a virtual or in person, it's an hour of getting together and going through the content with the opportunity to customize content for your brand or industry or sector. So yeah, excited to hear from more folks who are interested in that as well.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it so much. Lola, thank you for being with me. You're such a gem in my life. And I am so grateful for this conversation and all the ones that are to come.
Aww. Right back at you, my friend. I'm so excited to be on the campfire circle. We need to go have some s'mores now. I'm feeling the love.
Yes. Do you like them real crispy burnt, or do you like them slightly toasted?
Oh no, I'm like almost rare person. Like, people who like their waffles like not even done in the middle. I'm like that with s'mores. Just melted, but no char.
Okay, see, I'm like a well done. I like it totally like crispy, full of carcinogens, but that's okay. To each their own.
Opposites attract. Exactly.
That's right. Awesome. Thanks so much, Lola.
Thank you, my friend.
What'd you think? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, or even better, reach out and let me know through lumosmarketing.co. Yes, that's Lumos, as in the illumination spell from Harry Potter. Because when you shine, magical things happen. You can get social with me on LinkedIn, and of course, check out the show notes to stay in touch with our guests. Let's talk soon.